Hello, everyone. I am Michelle Woodhouse, and I'm the Program Manager of Water at Environmental Defence Canada and a Métis Water Protector. Thank you all for joining us here today on the island of Montreal on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory, situated alongside the beautiful St. Lawrence Seaway Basin. The St. Lawrence Seaway Basin is where the Great Lakes drain into before the water makes its way to the Atlantic Ocean. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Basin encompasses the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, the Algonquin, the Maliseet, the Inus, and the Mi'kmaq peoples who have inhabited in these lands and waters since time immemorial. All of these nations are sovereign nations and are rights holders in their respective territories. This is especially important to remember today as we talk about the threats posed by Line 5 and the fossil fuel industry to the Great Lakes and to inherent rights and treaty rights of Indigenous nations of the Great Lakes. Indigenous nations' inherent water rights must be upheld, and today we will talk more about why this matters. You'll be hearing more from myself, as well as Tassine Murji, the conservation organizer for Sierra Club, Don Waller, a retired professor from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a Great Lakes biologist, Aurora Conley, a community and staff member for the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewas, and Travis Busno, Lake Huron's Regional Deputy Grand Council Chief for the Anishinaabe Nation. To get us started off, we are going to hear from Don Waller.
Yes, Michelle, continuing losses of biodiversity are one of the two central environmental crises of our time, and the reason we are here in Montreal, focused on important initiatives like 30 by 30 to preserve habitats around the world. Biodiversity losses are massive. Since 1970, almost 70% of the world's animal populations have declined. Some 30% of mammals are at risk of extinction, with similar numbers for amphibians, birds, and many other groups. At the same time, we faced enormous disruptions to global climates, the focus of the recent COP27 in Egypt. Around the world, we see increases in global heating, droughts, floods, and intense wind and rainstorms. The Great Lakes experiences all these effects. We also face a third social crisis: widespread failures to recognize and respect the rights and knowledge of sovereign, native, indigenous peoples. Over and over, we see Indigenous peoples' rights to self-determination undermined by cultural, economic, and political forces. Consider 3 points. These crises are linked and must be addressed together with speed and determination. To reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, we must move quickly to protect mature forests and the bountiful wetlands of the Midwest and other regions. These have great capacities to absorb and store vast amounts of carbon. We must also make allies with the tribes and First Nations, respecting their sovereignty and rights to self-determination. Ojibwe treaty rights extend far beyond their reservations to cover most county, state, and national forests in the upper U.S. Midwest. Let us next critically evaluate whether we should continue pursuing massive investments in obsolete pipelines like Line 5. What's at risk here? The Great Lakes are home to a distinctive and diverse biota. Primarily a forested landscape, we see less than 1% in old-growth forests like those that once blanketed the region. Extensive wetland habitats cover 100,000 hectares. The largest wetland complex around Lake Superior is the Kakagan Sloughs, designated a Ramsar International Treaty Wetland of International Importance. They generate abundant fish and the biggest wild rice, menumen harvests, in the Midwest. They provide sustenance for the Bad River tribal members as well as a source of income. They also lie directly in the path of any oil spill from Line 5. The upper Midwest is the home to 170 species of fish in the Great Lakes and its streams and rivers. Beavers, an ecosystem engineer and clan animal. Ungulates like moose, elk, caribou, and white-tailed deer. Impressive birds like trumpeter swans, eagles, osprey, and a diverse assemblage of neotropical migrant songbirds. Carnivores, large and small, like cougar, wolf, wolverine, bobcat, gray and red fox, and American marten, another totem animal. The Ojibwe consider the wolf to be kin, a brother. Yet in the U.S., wolves have bounced rapidly between being protected and being persecuted. Limiting hunting and trapping is difficult in the age of teams of hunters driving trucks with radios and tracking radio-collared dogs. In 2021, hunters killed 216 wolves within 72 hours, double their quota of 119, occurring during mating season, disrupting pack social structures and interfering with their reproduction. This also deeply violated promises to honor the quota of wolves allocated to the Ojibwe. Traditional ecological knowledge deserves more attention. Working with my Indian Studies colleague Nick Rio, we found that larger Indian reservations in Wisconsin had higher tree volumes, higher forest plant diversity, better tree regeneration, and healthier mammal and carnivore populations than surrounding non-Indian lands. Why aren't we learning from their example? Climate threats to the Great Lakes biodiversity are many. Our region is warming much faster than other US states. Extreme flood and drought events are becoming common. We see increases in erosion and water contamination. Climate change particularly threatens the plant and animal species tribes depend on. Bluegill, smallmouth and largemouth bass, brown bullhead are migrating north. Moose are declining quickly in Minnesota. Bird diseases are becoming commoner. Research in my lab has shown that plant species have already begun to respond to climate change by migrating north and west. Yet most species are falling far behind, unable to keep up with the pace of climate change. Wild rice, menumen, is sacred to the Anishinaabe and vital to their existence. It's also particularly sensitive to changes in water level and water quality that climate change and pipelines cause. I'll end by discussing the particular threat of the Line 5 pipeline. Building pipelines destroys habitats, pollutes waters, and punctures aquifers, disrupting and contaminating groundwater flows. It also creates lots of edge habitat favoring invasive species and opportunistic nest predators and parasites. Punitive trespass laws now threaten traditional Ojibwe hunting and gathering rights by blocking traditional access routes. Line 5 is as old as I am, but it wasn't designed to last as long. It dates to 1953 and is designed to last 50 years. It ships oil, burned to generate energy, releases greenhouse gases, and disrupts our climate. It runs from Superior, Wisconsin, across the UP of Michigan, under the Great Lakes at the Straits of Mackinac, down the Lower Peninsula, and exits in Sarnia, Ontario. 95% of the oil that enters Line 5 re-exits the United States there. Great Lake species are sensitive to both disrupted climates and the impacts of building pipelines, not to mention the impacts from the leaks that regularly occur. A Line 5 oil spill would have devastating impacts. We know that oil is very toxic to fish, even at levels measured in the parts per million. Gills are particularly sensitive to hydrocarbons. Eggs and larval fish are even more sensitive, being affected in the parts per billion range. In 2000, a pipeline rupture along the Pine River in British Columbia killed somewhere between 50,000 and 250,000 fish. The Ramsar wetland of international importance, the Kakagan Sloughs, a nursery for fish that supports more wild rice than other wetlands, are also threatened. Wild rice is very sensitive to oil, which makes a slick on the surface, coating right stems. And when heavier parts of the tar sands oil sink, it interferes with seedling establishment and contaminates sediments for decades. Oil would also contaminate the shores of Lake Superior, threatening the endangered piping plovers, bald eagles, and other wildlife. Back to Michelle to describe other threats posed by Line 5.
One of the largest threats to the Great Lakes is the Line 5 pipeline, and this has been documented in a state of ill repair. The pipeline has leaked at least 33 times since 1953 and has spilled at least 4.5 million liters of oil into surrounding lands and waters, and most of these leaks were not detected by Enbridge's leak detection system. Experts have said this pipeline lies in the worst possible place for an oil spill to occur in the world, in the heart of the world's largest freshwater system, a source of drinking water for over 40 million Great Lakes residents across nations, and home to over 4,000 species of plants, fish, and wildlife. Up to 1,200 kilometers of Great Lakes shoreline could become engulfed with crude oil from a Line 5 spill. This is an ecological disaster in the making. Studies have shown economic damages from a Line 5 spill could exceed 5.6 billion USD. This is a conservative estimate that doesn't include the economic cost of impacts to Canadian shorelines. And because it sinks in water, tar sands oil can be extremely difficult and expensive to clean up. And in the event of a Line 5 rupture into the Straits of Mackinac, in a best case scenario, Enbridge could shut off the pipeline in 13 and a half minutes. And in 13 and a half minutes, over 1 million liters of oil could be released into the Straits of Mackinac and gush out into the Great Lakes. It took this company 17 hours to turn off the horrific Line 6B spill into the Kalamazoo River after learning about it from a local utility worker that had smelled the fumes. This spill sickened more than 300 people and displaced 150 families. This is horrifying. We're talking about a situation where we could see an ecological disaster occur in the Great Lakes, and places like Manitoulin Island in Canada and the Bruce Peninsula and beloved beaches of Lake Huron could be completely devastated. The cumulative and legacy impacts to Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake
好，这个呢，遭受到的呢，
harm to the Great Lakes. Multiple industry expert analyses, including analyses commissioned by Environmental Defense and several analyses commissioned by Bad River Band, confirm that viable alternatives exist to Line 5. Some retooling and adjusting of the existing oil and gas infrastructure network can accommodate this shift. We do not need to choose between protecting the Great Lakes and meeting our energy needs. And Canada's use of the 1977 treaty as a way to keep the Line 5 pipeline open is a clear example of how this country will speak a big game about protecting Canadian biodiversity, such as that found within the Great Lakes. Will speak a big game about acting on climate change and acting on reconciliation. Meanwhile, their actions with Line 5 have been efforts to circumvent tribal rights in the U.S. legal system and ignore inherent rights and treaty rights of the Indigenous nations of the Great Lakes. This includes the ability to be able to hunt, fish, and harvest the lands and waters of their traditional territories that Line 5 is a direct threat to. This 1977 treaty makes no mention of the rights of Indigenous nations, does not take into context the current energy system and the renewables revolution that we are in. There is also a section of the treaty which states the transmission of hydrocarbons through a transit pipeline shall be subject to regulations by the appropriate governmental authorities having jurisdiction over such transit pipeline with respect to matters such as the following: pipeline safety and environmental protection. So rather than invoking the 1977 treaty to go to bat for Enbridge and keep Line 5 open, Canada must put Great Lakes protections and inherent rights and treaty rights of Indigenous nations ahead of the fossil fuel economy and ahead of a pipeline that neither country needs. I will now pass it over to Tessine.
Canadian leaders, Quebec's premier, provincial refineries Suncor and Valero, and notorious Canadian crude oil company Enbridge are defending a dangerous fossil fuel project that transports oil from Alberta to Quebec, shortcut through the Midwestern United States, in defiance of the first ever shutdown order on an existing pipeline. They're using false arguments, myths, and inconclusive evidence that operate under the premise that we are not in a climate crisis to make a case for the continued operation of a pipeline that threatens 1/5 of the world's fresh water, drinking water for 40 million people, Indigenous treaty rights, and billions in trade. While Quebec is the first jurisdiction in the world to ban any future oil and gas development, Montreal continues to receive oil from Line 5 via Line 9B. Like Michelle mentioned, Enbridge is lying about our need for Line 5. Her report tells us what climate groups have been saying for years. We can meet our energy needs without Line 5. None of the states or provinces served by Enbridge's mainline system, including Quebec, would suffer from an energy supply shortage in the event of a permanent Line 5 closure. We have undeniable evidence that a renewable energy transition in Canada is possible. Pro-oil proponents for the continued operation of Line 5 are capitalizing off of the war in Ukraine, rising inflation rates, and an increased cost of living. These are dishonest and misleading tactics. International energy markets determine the price of oil, not a single pipeline. Quebec's political leaders can make a robust case to retire Line 5 by calling on the federal government to stop defending the pipeline. Lastly, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Stephen Guilbeault, and Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly, all of whom represent federal ridings here in Montreal, must also stop defending Line 5 and stand in solidarity with Indigenous communities in the United States and American activists who have spent nearly a decade fighting this pipeline by ensuring Governor Whitmer's monumental shutdown order to protect the Great Lakes is enforced once and for all. I'll pass it to Travis.
Honey, Mesconemkin Nadashikas Ojijak Todem Kitagansibi Dunjaba. My name is Travis Buzzo. I'm the Regional Deputy Grand Council Chief of the Anishinaabe Nation. I'm here today as a representative of the Anishinaabe to express our support and our solidarity with our brothers and sisters on the American side and with the 12 tribal nations. At the Anishinaabe, we represent 39 First Nation communities following Lake Superior and down and around Lake Huron. In 1850, our communities, our leadership signed a treaty with the Canadian government. And for the Canadian government to invoke the 1977 Pipeline Treaty is a clear violation of the treaty that we signed and the relationship that we're building with Canada. Not only am I here to support our friends, but I'm also here to invite and implore the Canadian government to reach out to their treaty partners and to have this full conversation around Line 5 and how we can either stop it or find viable options. It's far too long that a lot of our grievances with our treaty and our relationship with the Crown continues to get debated in the judicial system. Our relationship cannot continue to be designed by courtrooms. So today, I'm here again to announce on behalf of all of our communities that we're here with you, and we will continue the conversation and be there with your families.
Buju, Gijagukwe Indigenous, Mushkazibing and Dunjaba Maying and Dodem. My English name is Aurora Conley. My spirit name is Sky Woman. I come from Bad River, Wisconsin on Lake Superior. I come from the Wolf Clan there. I had a rundown of facts, and I reached out to the chairman and my boss this morning, and they encouraged me that to speak from the heart, because Don was kind enough to give you plenty of the facts in the beginning, and I'm sure a majority of you could find that on Google. What you can't find is how much I love Bad River. You can't find that kind of love when you go into the Kakagan sloughs and you canoe down there, because we do not allow boats to help preserve that rice in that area. Motorized boats are not allowed. You have to paddle by hand the way they did thousands of years ago. And speaking of thousands of years ago, I'd like to acknowledge that the space that we're in, this geographical space that we're in today, the Anishinaabe had traveled from this area thousands of years ago in our migration story. We were told to travel until we could find the food that grows on water. And that brought us to the Lake Superior region, where we found the Monoman, the wild rice. And that's where we stayed, and that's where we made that commitment as Anishinaabe to take care of that rice. And that was thousands of years ago, and we've maintained that commitment and that promise to the Creator. Only in my lifetime, and I'm young, I'm barely 40, but only in my lifetime I've seen the depletion of those rice fields as well, due to climate change, due to invasive species, just the changes over the last 20 years, so to speak. We had a catastrophic flood in 2016. We had a 100-year flood in Bad River region, and it was devastating to our region. We had no power for days. We were trying to get the community accessible to just some of the resources that were outside of our community. And it was really eye-opening about the potential that Mother Earth has against types of things like the pipeline, even the roads were washed out. These are things that were man-made, that were, put to tests and put to, that these will withstand elements and, all these promises. And we watched it literally wash away. And it just really, as us, as a community, as a people, had us realize the things that were at risk. Our rice, our livelihood, us as Ojibwe people. We're in a litigation right now with Enbridge. Yesterday, they had to submit the last of their documents to the judge. And it's heartbreaking to think that we had to fight, and we have to continue to fight just to be Anishinaabe people. Just to fight for that right in general, that treaty right that says that we can live here and hunt and fish and gather and do the things that make us those people, to eat our foods, to work with the tools and use those tools to make us who we are, to exist on our own land. And the fear is, should something happen to the rice, what happens to the people? Will we be able to survive as humans? Yes. As Anishinaabe? No. That's what makes us, a part of us. That was a gift from the Creator, and we do not take it. We do not take it lightly. We celebrate every August. Hundreds of people come back to the community just to be there, just to participate, just to touch it, to see it, to eat it. And we've seen many communities around us, St. Louis and Minnesota, that have depleted their rice fields due to just the catastrophic effects of pipelines and oil and things like that. I'm here on this delegation, and I just want to say Chimigwich for that. It reminds me, in the 1850s, there was a delegation from our region that went to DC, and they had to fight for the land that we're fighting for today in those treaties. In 1854, they signed the treaty, which gave us our reservations. We ceded all them territories and became the Bad Rivers Reservation. We became those different communities throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. We had to fight for that. So as a delegate today, coming back and having to fight and represent again and speak to officials and authorities about what is important to us and what makes us us. And I'm very proud to do that. And we are here. I'm a vice chair for the Anishinaabe Environmental Protection Alliance. There's always going to be many things that people want out of our community, whether it's the fish or the studies or a pipeline to come through, and we maintain our stronghold in the Bad River community so that we can, for the next 7 generations, so that my children and my grandchildren can rice in the sloughs, and that in 50 years, 100 years, they can say that my great-grandma fought for us to do that. Aho miigwech, mio. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're out of time because we have another press conference coming up right behind after us. But if any press wants to talk to us right now, we can do so in the media center. Thank you.